Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're tackling the most complex and honestly, the most fascinating wiring diagram in the known universe, the human central nervous system. You can really think of clinical neurology as the ultimate medical whodunit. When a patient comes in with a mysterious weakness, a sudden loss of sensation, or even a bizarre change in behavior, the body is actually handing us a map. We just need to know how to read it. So our job today is to decode that map together.
Everything we're going to cover today really hinges on one fundamental diagnostic question. Where is the lesion? Before any MRI is ordered, before you even think about spinning up that CT scanner, a clinician absolutely has to ask this exact question. Recognizing those characteristic patterns of cognitive, motor, and sensory deficits is exactly what allows us to pinpoint the precise site of the damage.
Right, let's dive into this. What is neurological localization anyway? Well, it's the methodical process of determining the exact anatomical site responsible for a patient's dysfunction, and you're relying entirely on the patient's history in the physical exam. As our sources emphasize, clinical localization must always precede imaging. Basically, the imaging is just there to confirm what your brilliant detective work has already figured out.
So here's our roadmap for the explainer. We're taking a structured, top-down anatomical journey using the clinical principles of the DAPS-CAMP framework. We'll start out as the localization detective, map the cerebral cortex, descend into the subcortical and brainstem areas, travel all the way down the spinal cord to the periphery, contrast upper versus lower motor neurons, and finally wrap up with some high-yield clinical pearls.
Let's kick things off with Section 1, the localization detective. I want you to step into the shoes of a methodical investigator. In this world, symptoms are your vital clues. To solve the mystery, your diagnostic approach has to rely on three foundational questions. First up, what is the deficit? Second, our golden question, where is the lesion? And third, what is the likely cause? Like, is it an embolus from atrial fibrillation or maybe an autoimmune demyelinating plaque like you'd see in multiple sclerosis? The catch here is you literally cannot answer question 3 until you've confidently answered question 2.
Moving right along to Section 2, mapping the cerebral cortex.
Let's begin our descent at the very top. The frontal lobe is basically your executive center, so damage here leaves you with behavioral changes, expressive aphasia, and contralateral weakness. Just behind that, we've got the parietal lobe, our main sensory processing center. Now, damage here doesn't actually cause weakness. Instead, it leads to profound contralateral sensory loss, hemispatial neglect, or apraxia.
Continuing our map, the temporal lobe handles memory, emotion, and hearing. Lesions here are going to produce memory impairment, receptive aphasia, and complex partial seizures. Contrast that with the stark visual territory of the occipital lobe at the very back of the brain. Damage there results in homonymous heminopia, or in severe cases, outright cortical blindness.
Let's go a bit deeper into Section 3, subcortical and brainstem lesions.
Now, what's really interesting about this next level is how these deep structures produce incredibly pure deficits. Take the internal capsule, for instance. Because major motor fibers are bundled super tightly together right here, a tiny lesion produces a dense, pure motor hemiplegia on the opposite side of the body. Then you have the basal ganglia, which gives us movement disorders. Think the rigidity and tremor of Parkinson's or the writhing movements of chorea. And the thalamus, basically the brain's grand sensory relay station, will cause profound contralateral sensory loss and occasionally really severe neuropathic pain. Stepping just below that down to the brainstem and cerebellum, we see some vastly different presentations. The absolute hallmark of a brainstem lesion is crossed signs. This means you get a cranial nerve palsy on the same side as the lesion, but the body weakness or sensory loss is on the opposite side. The cerebellum, on the other hand, produces purely ipsilateral issues. So you're looking at things like ataxia, dysmetria, and intention tremors on the same side as the damage.
Exiting the skull now for Section 4, spinal cord and periphery.
And this brilliantly illustrates the normal sensory pathway as it builds upwards from the outside world. Information starts at a peripheral receptor and nerve, travels into the posterior root and spinal cord, ascends through the brainstem up to the thalamus, and finally reaches the sensory cortex. It's like a giant electrical circuit. Any interruption along this precise route produces predictable, highly localizable deficits. Find the break, find the lesion.
So what do breaks in these lower pathways actually look like? Well, if the spinal cord takes the hit, you'll generally find a sharp sensory level on the trunk, which is very often accompanied by bowel or bladder dysfunction. Moving further out to a peripheral nerve, the loss becomes strictly focal, like a classic drop foot.
If the nerve is perfectly fine but the neuromuscular junction is failing, you'll see fatigable weakness. Finally, primary muscle diseases cap off our journey with a characteristic symmetric proximal weakness.
Which brings us to Section 5, upper versus lower motor.
Okay, so the crucial point here, and this is arguably the single most important concept in clinical neurology, is the S for signs in our Dapsicamp framework. Recognizing whether a weakness is upper or lower motor neuron instantly splits your diagnostic tree right in half. Think about it. Upper motor neurons are the pathways from the brain down through the cord. Damage them, and the brakes are completely off. This leads to spasticity, hyperreflexia, and a positive Babinski sign. Lower motor neurons, though, are the actual nerves traveling out to the muscle. Cut them, and the connection is just gone, resulting in flaccidity, severe muscle wasting, absent reflexes, and fasciculations.
Let's tie it all together in Section 6, high-yield clinical pearls.
Let's see how this builds into an ultimate clinical cheat sheet. Pairing specific anatomical sites with their most reliable hallmark features is a total game changer. For example, if you see cross signs, so the face is affected on one side but the body on the other, you know for sure you're in the brainstem. A dense, pure motor hemiplegia, that means a tiny lesion in the internal capsule. And if your patient has a sharp sensory level across their abdomen with bladder retention, you must immediately suspect a spinal cord lesion and investigate fast to prevent permanent damage.
Now, before we wrap up, I have to share this brilliant caveat straight from the Oxford Handbook. It points out, where is a great first question, but note that sometimes there is no single lesion, rather a general insult. As powerful as our localization map is, we all know the real world can be messy. Sometimes a patient has a diffuse issue like anoxia, systemic poisoning, or a broad neurodegenerative disease like Alzheimer's that simply doesn't play by the strict rules of a focal lesion. A truly great detective knows exactly when the clues point to a single broken wire and when the whole system is just under stress. So I'll leave you with this final thought. How will you approach your very next medical mystery? Will you look at a symptom as just a patient complaint, or will you see it as a specific coordinate on a map? By mastering this top-down, methodical detective work, you can decode the entire nervous system and pinpoint the problem before a single image is even taken. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember, always keep asking, where is the lesion?